Okay, let's talk about one of the most baffling legal situations you can find yourself in the Philippines. It's a real head scratcher in family law that can leave a person stuck in this weird legal limbo. It sounds like a riddle, right? But for a whole lot of Filipinos, this isn't some puzzle you think about for fun. Nope. It's a real, incredibly frustrating, and legally tangled reality. So how on earth is this even possible? All right, let's get into it. So this whole issue really starts with what we can call the one-sided divorce problem. For the longest time, the law created this situation that was just fundamentally unfair for any Filipino who was married to a foreign citizen. Get this. You've got a married couple, one's a foreigner, one's Filipino. The foreign spouse goes back to their home country, gets a divorce, and just like that, they're legally single again, totally free to move on, even remarry. But the Filipino spouse? Well, back here in the Philippines, they are still, legally speaking, married to someone who isn't even married to them anymore. It created this absolutely absurd situation. So why? Why did this happen? Well, it all boils down to a core legal idea called the nationality principle. Basically, think of it this way. Filipino family law follows Filipino citizens around like a shadow, no matter where they are in the world. And since absolute divorce isn't a thing in the Philippines, that rule stuck to the Filipino spouse, even if their foreign partner could legally end the marriage under their own country's laws. I mean, you can see how this was a major problem, right? It was a clear injustice that needed a fix. So, lawmakers finally stepped in and created a very specific, very important exception to the rule, a legal way out of this mess. And here is that solution, the second paragraph of Article 26 of the Family Code. Now, I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but the core idea is actually pretty simple. It says that if the foreign spouse gets a valid divorce overseas that lets them remarry, then, and this is the key part, the Filipino spouse also gets the ability to remarry under Philippine law. It was a direct shot at leveling the playing field. Okay, so let's break that legal language down into 3 simple steps. First, there has to be a valid marriage between a Filipino and a foreigner. Check. Second, the foreign spouse has to be the one to get the divorce in their country. And third, that divorce has to make them legally able to remarry. If all 3 of those boxes are ticked, then the Filipino spouse can finally get that foreign divorce recognized right here in the Philippines. But you know how it is with laws, right? You fix one problem and suddenly another one, a new tricky situation that maybe nobody saw coming, pops up. Real life is always messier than the textbooks, and a new scenario came along to really test the limits of this new rule. So here's the curveball. The law is super specific. It says a marriage between a Filipino citizen and a foreigner. But what happens if 2 Filipinos get married and then, down the road, one of them becomes a citizen of another country and then gets a divorce? Does the Filipino spouse who stayed in the Philippines still get to use Article 26? If you just read the law word for word, the answer seems like it would be, well, no. And this wasn't just some hypothetical question. It became the heart of a major Supreme Court case. Picture this. A Filipino couple gets married in 1981. 5 years go by, the wife moves and becomes a naturalized American citizen. Then, 14 years after that, she gets a divorce in the U.S. So her husband, still a Filipino citizen, now wants to remarry. The big question was, could he? This whole situation landed right in the lap of the highest court. And this, my friends, is where the story gets really good. The Supreme Court had a choice to make. Do they stick to the exact, literal wording of the law, or do they look deeper at what the law was trying to accomplish? You know, its spirit. The court looked at this through the lens of a really powerful legal idea, that laws are not supposed to create injustice. The whole point is that if reading a law strictly leads to a ridiculous or unfair result, then that reading is probably the wrong one. You should always aim for the interpretation that makes sense and is fair. So the Supreme Court's ruling was a game changer. They said, look, the whole point of Article 26 was to fix the crazy situation where a Filipino is stuck in a marriage all by themselves. And that unfairness is the exact same whether their spouse was a foreigner from day one or became a foreigner later. So to deny the Filipino husband in this case his freedom would defeat the very purpose of the law. And so they ruled that yes, he could remarry. Whew. So after that whole legal journey, what's the bottom line for us today? Let's quickly recap the most important takeaways. All right, so here's the deal now. Thanks to the Supreme Court, Article 26, Paragraph 2 covers 2 main situations. The original one, a marriage between a Filipino and a foreigner right from the start,
And now, the expanded one, a marriage that starts with two Filipinos, but one of them later becomes a citizen of another country and gets divorced there. In both of those scenarios, the Filipino spouse now has a clear path to get that divorce recognized and be free to remarry.
When you step back and look at it, what we're really seeing is the law evolving. It's not just static words on a page. It was first changed by lawmakers and then interpreted by the court, all to bend it a little closer toward justice and fairness. It's actually a pretty cool example of how our legal system can adapt to fix things that are broken and deal with the real, messy lives people actually live.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. The law changed to fix a specific injustice that became obvious over time. But as our society keeps changing and evolving, you have to wonder, where will the next evolution in our family laws be needed to make sure things are fair for everyone? It's definitely something to think about.